If there is someone who can expose Europe's exploitation of Africa, it's the former African Union ambassador, Dr. Arikana Chihombori Kwao. Perhaps that's the reason she was fired from her post in 2019. Even though European colonizers have used subtle ways to continue exploiting African countries, it's hidden from nobody. The Western media would like to justify and hide these abuses, and people in the West seem to believe whatever false is said. However, what Dr. Arikana said recently has not only made European countries like France sweat, but it has also shaken their legs. From explaining how France puts puppet presidents in Francophone African countries, to how it deprives them of their natural resources, she gave a good beating to all the European countries with colonial mentality. But what more did she say? Let's know about that. What's happening right now in the African continent is something that never happened in the past. The Western world might like to dub Africa's fight for real independence as coups, but in reality, they are kicking the European colonizers out. These colonizers continued to suck blood even after superficially ending their colonial era. For years, Dr. Arikana has been more vocal about this than anyone else. She was the African Union ambassador to the US until 2019, after which she was removed forcibly. It's because she started to expose colonial powers which continue to exploit Africa to this day, including France. Hence, since the West and the US could not handle her, let alone answer her questions, they forced the African Union to remove her from ambassadorship. But she did not stop. Recently, she addressed what's happening in Africa and how European countries are stressed out about that. She said that there is indeed a significant issue at hand, especially for Western nations. It's clear that they didn't anticipate this turn of events as happening in Niger and Gabon. However, it was rather naive on the part of Western nations to believe that the exploitation of Africa would continue without any resistance indefinitely. She continued and said that it's becoming evident that Western powers may be facing a daunting challenge. What's unfolding in Africa can certainly be characterized as a revolution, and a long overdue one at that. When we talk about the nature of this revolution, it's important to understand that it's essentially a revelation among the Black population. People are waking up to the fact that the historical exploitation of Africa has been fundamentally wrong, and they are demanding change. True change must come from the people themselves. This African awakening is marked by a growing awareness among the electorate. They are now well informed and understand the real issues, and how important this has been for Africa cannot be put in words. The main trigger everyone was waiting for was that people in Africa should stand up and stand united, which they are doing now. Dr. Arikana said that in the past, Africans were often misled and given false information, diverting their attention from the true culprits. This was part of the brainwashing propaganda by establishing schools working under the financial aid programs of the Western world. One might understand what they taught the young Africans there. They undertook the job of indoctrinating the young Africans so their leanings could be made flexible. In that way, they did not know who was to blame, avoiding any chances of revolution. But now, things changed so rapidly that France has been left with no time to do anything about that at all. During the coup in Niger, France and Macron did not, and the same was the case during the coup in Gabon. In both countries, France had soldiers present, but they decided not to intervene or avoid the coup. This simply means accepting the de facto reality that from now on, Africa is powerful and it will not tolerate any interference. Dr. Arikana said that in the past, many African leaders were essentially puppets, put in place to perpetuate the legacy of their former colonial rulers, particularly in the former French colonies. They were constrained with no control over their military, natural resources, or finances. However, the tide is changing, and people are realizing the need for sovereignty. Dr. Arikana pointed toward a very bitter reality. African nations have been forced to deposit their bank reserves with France, surrendering control over their valuable natural resources without adding value and granting France preferential rights to contracts. Not only that, but earlier, France has maintained its military presence and the ability to intervene in these countries when it feels its interests are threatened. It has also ensured that these countries can only receive training and equipment from France. This web of control is now being unveiled, and people are beginning to grasp the depth of the exploitation they have endured. In a recent interview, Dr. Arikana was given the opportunity to express her views without interruptions or distortions, which is commendable. One key point she made is that the West did not anticipate the recent wave of activism in Africa. The youth, especially in the Sahel and Western regions, have risen up to reject exploitation, puppet leadership, and dehumanization. She touched on the fact that some African leaders, like the recently overthrown President Mahamadou Issoufou, were seen as allies of Western nations. These leaders often prioritized Western interests over their own country's development. Dr. Arikana questioned the integrity and intentions of leaders who are considered Western allies, as their actions may not benefit their own people. Another critical issue she raised is the exploitation of Africa's vast resources. For example, she mentioned how Niger sells uranium to France for a meager 90 cents per kilogram, while France then sells it to other Western nations for $200 per kilogram. This enormous profit margin for Western countries at the expense of African resources is shocking and unjust. It highlights the extreme level of exploitation that African nations have endured. Dr. Arikana said something which European countries should be ashamed of. She said that Western countries have benefited by building their infrastructure and education systems using African resources. However, their insatiable greed has pushed Africans to their breaking point. This is why many Africans are saying, enough is enough. They are rejecting French and American exploitation in various regions of the continent. Here we should know what Dr. Arikana thinks about the ongoing coups in Africa. She said that the situation in Niger differs from many other coups that have occurred on the continent. It stands out in the sense that it was genuinely initiated by the Nigerian people in response to their dissatisfaction with the existing status quo. This sets it apart from other coups that have been orchestrated by Western powers to serve their own interests. Dr. Arikana argues that the current situation in Niger should not be labeled a coup, but rather a revolution or an ideological shift in economic, political, and social values. She emphasizes that the new generation of Africans is awakening to these issues. She further states that since the Niger junta enjoys the support of the masses, dialogue and peaceful resolution should be pursued as a far better option than resorting to outright military intervention. She stresses that military intervention in Niger is not a viable option, and goes on to assert that as Africans, we must find better ways to address our issues. She calls on our elders to come together and engage in meaningful conversations, focusing on what is ultimately best for the people. This includes not only the people in Niger, but also those in all former French colonies, and ultimately, all African countries. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video, and subscribe to our channel. To watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. Dr. Arikana stresses that this moment calls for unity, meaningful unity of purpose among African leaders. It's a call to acknowledge that the current situation can no longer persist, as the people have spoken, and she hopes that our leadership will listen. She distinguishes the recent events in Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Guinea from previous coups orchestrated by Western powers, many of which had their own hidden agendas. Some of these leaders who attempted to act in their people's best interests were tragically assassinated. The difference lies in the fact that these recent movements are led by the people themselves. The people have gained a deep understanding of the issues, and they are standing up to declare that the current situation is unfair and unacceptable. Dr. Arikana believes that what is happening in these four countries should be seen as an ideological realignment of their economic, political, and social values. It's driven by a sense of desperation among the people due to the vast natural resources and widespread poverty. This awakening has prompted the people to rise up and demand change. Dr. Arikana said that when we examine the situation in the former French colonies, we find a disturbing reality. Even before a president assumes office, there are certain areas that are considered off-limits, areas that, if touched upon, could jeopardize one's life. These areas include the military, finances, and the requirement to deposit reserves with the French treasury. Additionally, it extends to the domain of natural resources, where French companies hold the first right of approval. In short, African presidents are told that as long as they refrain from discussing these critical aspects, such as the French military presence in their country, the training and equipping of their military by France, and the exploitation of their natural resources, they are free to govern their nation as they see fit. Dr. Arikana asked to consider the dilemma of such leaders. What kind of leadership could they provide when these fundamental areas of economic development are no longer within their reach? It is utterly bewildering that, despite the passage of time, African leaders have been unable to undo the agreements that were imposed upon them when they gained independence. It's impossible that a country like Niger in 2023 remains the second poorest in the world while the bulk of its resources continue to flow to France. Most of Niger lacks access to electricity, yet its uranium powers France and Europe. This injustice extends across various aspects, and it is both unfair and unacceptable. One cannot help but wonder how Western powers can go to bed each night, knowing the havoc they have wrought in Africa, and expecting this exploitation to endure indefinitely. She asserted that the time has arrived for the children of Africa to awaken. In an exclusive interview with the Amsterdam News, Ambassador Chihombori Kwao stated that the colonizers never truly departed. In reality, the colonizers have maintained their influence in every aspect of our lives. Even when we gained independence in the 50s and 60s, it was primarily political independence, she said. She went on to say that even that independence is restricted because they still dictate and control the selection of the next country's president. During the conversation, she emphasized that Africa is still wrestling with the struggle to break free from the oppressive grip of European colonialism. She said that we never achieved economic liberation. They kept it from us. She added that in former English colonies, numerous British companies still operate and employ a significant portion of the population. This restricts the president's ability to make critical decisions due to the fear of consequences if those controlling the economy become dissatisfied. Therefore, we require economic liberation, and until that is achieved, Africa will continue to face challenges. Back in 2019, due to having a strict stance on Europe's exploitation, she was removed as the African Union's ambassador to the US. When asked about her surprise at the global response, the ambassador expressed that she was completely taken aback and that she never anticipated it. She remembered the time and said, "Someone sent me the petition, and I came across it like everyone else. I was genuinely shocked. I didn't realize that the work I had been engaged in had reached such far-reaching audiences. I was simply a mother and grandmother who also happened to be a diplomat, speaking our truth." She said that she believed that she had been given a platform to represent 1.27 billion people on the continent and 250 million in the Americas. If she didn't speak out against the injustices and problems she witnessed every day, then it would mean that the 1.27 billion people in Africa and the 250 million in the Americas would be left voiceless. That was not something she was willing to accept. Belonging to Zimbabwe, the ambassador attributes her inspiration to her father's account of white settlers forcibly evicting their family from ancestral land when he was a 13-year-old boy. She said that her father remembered the British arriving and setting the entire village ablaze, causing everyone to scatter in all directions, clutching whatever they could carry and fleeing. Her father recalled how all the land was taken and how brutal it was. But he always said these people were thieves, and one day we would defeat them. She said that she grew up with the belief that the British were thieves and that they were destined to be defeated. That fighting spirit was always within her, and her father always believed that one day we would triumph. She said that she was glad her father lived to witness us reclaim our land. Earlier, in the months leading up to Dr. Arikana Chihombori Kwao's dismissal, she delivered a series of speeches in which she openly challenged France's role in Africa. Within this neo-colonial framework, Africa contributes a staggering $500 billion annually to the French treasury, and this is shameful. France has utilized this wealth to make substantial investments and inject trillions of dollars into its own economy. Even France's longest-serving president, François Mitterrand, candidly acknowledged in 1957 that, without Africa, France will slide down into the rank of a third-world power. Furthermore, the CFA franc, a currency used by 14 nations in Western and Central Africa, has been exploited by France to maintain control over its former colonies. Dr. Chihombori Kwao has been a vocal advocate for exposing how France continues to exploit Africa's resources. Out of approximately 68 coups that have occurred in Africa, a staggering 61% have unfolded in what are known as Francophone countries. In essence, any African leader working to free their country from France's economic stranglehold faced the threat of being ousted through a coup engineered by France. However, this time is different. Now, coups in African countries are being carried out by real African soldiers and supported by the people of African countries. That's an equation which has been completely changed by Africa. Isn't every word Dr. Arikana said true? Do you think that from now on, it will be impossible for France to continue exploiting African countries? Let us know your opinion on how African countries can kick European countries like France out of their home. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.